My name is Camila, and until a few weeks ago, I was just another aspiring Brazilian model trying to make a career in bustling São Paulo. I always dreamed of seeing my face plastered on billboards and magazines, but I never imagined that my first big international opportunity would come accompanied by a nightmare that would change my life forever. It all started when I received an unexpected invitation for a photo shoot at a fashion museum in Milan. After hours, the proposal seemed perfect. A unique setting in the world's fashion capital, a renowned photographer, and the chance to boost my career internationally. Little did I know that that night at the museum would trigger a series of events that would make me question not only my sanity, but the very nature of reality. Grateful for the opportunity, I arrived in Milan on a night flight. The city was illuminated, the contrast between the bright windows of luxury boutiques and the shadows of historic buildings creating an almost magical atmosphere. I passed by the imposing Milan Cathedral, its white marble shining under the night lights, and the elegant Galleria Vittorio Emanuele II, its arcades housing the world's most prestigious fashion brands. The museum was in a restored 18th century palace, its neoclassical facade standing out even among the surrounding historic buildings. As I approached, the building seemed to grow, becoming increasingly intimidating in the early evening twilight. The security guard who greeted me at the entrance had a vague, almost glassy look that caused me slight discomfort, but I was determined not to let small worries ruin my big chance. The interior of the museum was a maze of silent corridors, each room representing a different era of Italian fashion. Mannequins dressed in creations by legendary designers like Valentino, Armani, and Versace seemed to observe my every step. The dim lighting created dancing shadows on the walls, giving the impression that the figures were moving in the corner of my eyes. I tried to convince myself that it was just my vivid imagination reacting to the unusual environment. As I advanced through the museum, I had the strange sensation of traveling through time. One room displayed glamorous dresses from the 1950s. Another showed the bold creations of the 1960s and 1970s. Each environment had its own atmosphere, its own almost imperceptible sounds. The rustle of silks, the tinkling of jewelry, the distant echo of music from other eras. I was led to a larger room, where the photographer, a middle-aged man named Ricardo, was waiting for me. His smile didn't reach his eyes, which seemed to carry a weight that I couldn't understand. He explained the concept of the shoot. I should pose next to different iconic pieces of Italian fashion, blending the classic with the contemporary. The first photos went without incident, although I couldn't ignore the growing feeling that something was wrong. The mannequins seemed more realistic with each click of the camera, and I could swear I felt a slight movement coming from one of them when I passed by. It was when we got to the last part of the shoot that things started to get truly strange. Ricardo positioned me next to a mannequin that I didn't immediately recognize. The figure portrayed a beautiful woman with features reminiscent of Italian cinema divas from the 60s. Her eyes, unlike the other mannequins, seemed alive, almost hypnotic. "This is Veronica Ricci," Ricardo explained, his voice heavy with an emotion I couldn't identify. "One of Italy's greatest models of all time. They say she mysteriously disappeared at the height of her career, right here in Milan, during Fashion Week." A shiver ran down my spine as I heard those words. Suddenly, the temperature in the room seemed to drop dramatically. As I positioned myself next to Veronica's mannequin, I had the distinct sensation that something cold brushed against my arm. I turned abruptly, but the figure remained motionless, its enigmatic gaze fixed on a distant point. Ricardo started photographing, but something in his expression changed. He seemed tense, almost frightened. "Camila," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "could you smile a little more?" I forced a smile, but my heart raced when I realized that the photographer's eyes weren't focused on me, but on something just behind me. Slowly, I turned my head to look at Veronica's mannequin. My blood froze. The figure was no longer looking away. Her eyes, now unequivocally alive, were fixed on me, a sinister smile forming on her previously perfect and motionless lips. A scream got stuck in my throat when the lights flickered and went out for a moment. When they came back on, Ricardo had disappeared, leaving only his camera fallen on the floor. And Veronica's mannequin was no longer on its pedestal. Panic took over me, and I ran towards the exit, my heart beating so hard it felt like it was going to explode. But each corridor I passed through seemed to stretch infinitely. The mannequins now all turned in my direction, their accusing gazes following me. That's when I heard it, a whisper, almost imperceptible at first, but growing as I ran. "Resta con noi, Camila," the voices said in Italian, Diventa eterna, cum noi. Stay with us, Camila. Become eternal, like us. Terror completely took over me. I ran through the endless corridors of the museum, my steps echoing off the walls as I desperately tried to find an exit. Every time I looked back, I had the impression of seeing shadows moving, mannequins coming to life and approaching with a terrifying slowness. Suddenly, I tripped on something on the floor and fell. As I turned, I realized with horror that it was Ricardo's camera. But now, inexplicably, it was covered by a viscous, dark substance that resembled melted fabric. When I tried to touch it, the substance seemed to move of its own volition, escaping through my fingers as if it were alive. It was at that moment that I noticed something strange about my hands. The dim light coming from the emergency lamps revealed that my skin had an abnormal glow, almost as if it were turning into fabric. Terrified, I got up and continued running. Now, not only to escape the museum, but also to flee from the transformation that seemed to be happening to my own body. As I ran, I began to have flashes of memory that weren't mine. Fashion shows in Milan in the 60s, photo sessions in old studios, Veronica Ricci's face staring at me from a mirror. Non sono I tuoi ricordi, cara. They're not your memories, dear. A female voice whispered in my ear, even though there was no one nearby. Sono I miei. Presto. Saremo una cosa sola. They're mine. Soon we'll be one. I screamed and threw myself against a door, finally managing to get out of the exhibition area. I found myself in a narrow corridor leading to an old elevator. Without thinking twice, I entered it and frantically pressed the ground floor button. The doors closed slowly, but not before I saw a figure approaching down the corridor. It was Veronica, her body a grotesque mixture of flesh and fabric, moving unnaturally towards me. The elevator began to descend, creaking and shaking. I gasped, trying to catch my breath and understand what was happening. It was then that I noticed something strange on the metal walls of the elevator. The surface, previously opaque, began to gain an unusual shine, gradually becoming more reflective. Horrified, I saw that my distorted reflection began to appear on the elevator walls. But what stared back at me wasn't entirely me. My face was changing. Features that weren't mine began to overlap with my own. Veronica's face was slowly taking the place of mine. Non lottare contro questa. Veronica's voice echoed in my mind. Volevi essere famosa, no? Essere immortalata? Posso darti questo. Possiamo averlo insieme. You wanted to be famous, didn't you? To be immortalized? I can give you this. We can have it together. The elevator stopped abruptly between two floors, the lights flickering. In the dark, I saw something moving in the corners, like shadows taking shape. I closed my eyes tightly, praying that all of this was just a nightmare. When I opened them again, I found myself in a different corridor. It was no longer the museum, but it looked like the interior of an old Italian villa. The walls were covered with black and white photographs of fashion shows and photo shoots. In each of them, the same face, Veronica Ricci. Stumbling, I entered a room at the end of the corridor. In the center, there was a dressing table with a large oval mirror, typical of the dressing rooms of great Italian fashion houses. I sat in front of it, unable to look away from my transforming reflection. Perché io? Why me? I whispered, tears running down my face that was no longer entirely mine. The reflection smiled, but it wasn't me who controlled the movement. Perché hai potenziale, Camila, proprio come me. Ma il mondo è crudele con persone come noi. Ci usa e poi ci scarta. Qui possiamo essere eterne. Possiamo essere arte. Because you have potential, Camila, just like I did. But the world is cruel to people like us. It uses us and then discards us. Here we can be eternal. We can be art. As she spoke, I felt my body becoming rigid, the sensation of fabric spreading through my limbs. I tried to stand up, but I was stuck to the chair. Cosa mi sta succedendo? What's happening to me? I screamed in panic. Stai diventando parte della collezione, cara. You're becoming part of the collection. Veronica's voice answered, now coming from everywhere at once. Proprio come sono diventata io. Come sono diventati tutti gli altri, è l'unico modo per preservare la nostra bellezza per sempre. Just as I became, just as all the others became, it's the only way to preserve our beauty forever. At that moment, I understood the terrible secret of the museum. Each mannequin, each piece of clothing was once a real person. Models, designers, visitors, all captured and transformed to be part of this macabre collection of Italian fashion. The transformation was almost complete. I could feel my consciousness merging with Veronica's, our memories mixing, our identities becoming one. With a last effort of will, I extended my hand towards the mirror. My fingers, now almost entirely fabric, touched the cold surface. To my surprise, it rippled like water. C'è ancora una possibilità. There's still a chance, I thought, gathering my last strength. Una possibilità di scappare, di rompere questo ciclo. A chance to escape, to break this cycle. With a scream that was both mine and Veronica's, I launched myself against the mirror. The surface broke, not into shards of glass, but like a film, revealing a vortex of darkness beyond. As I was sucked into the darkness, I heard the furious screams of Veronica and countless other voices. The world around me dissolved into a whirlwind of images. Faces frozen in expressions of terror, hands outstretched, begging for help, glassy eyes watching me accusingly. And then, silence. I opened my eyes, breathless and disoriented. I was back in my apartment in São Paulo, sitting in front of my own mirror. I looked at my hands, my face, everything seemed normal. Had it just been a nightmare? It was then that I noticed something on my bedside table, a small business card from the Museo della Moda di Milano, with a date and time marked for a photo shoot. The date was for tonight. My blood ran cold. The nightmare hadn't started yet, or had it never ended. I picked up the card with trembling hands, determined to tear it up and throw it away. But when I turned it over, my heart almost stopped. On the back, written in elegant and old-fashioned handwriting, was a message. A presto, Camila. Ti aspetteremo, sempre. See you soon, Camila. We'll be waiting for you, always.